Got anything under there for me?
It's a holiday miracle.
Our best deals are still here. Come into Verizon and get 4 iPhone 17s on us. No trade-in needed. And 4 lines for just $25 a line.
Love that spirit, folks.
Last video, I laid out the structure of a neural network. I'll give a quick recap here, just so that it's fresh in our minds, and then I have 2 main goals for this video. The first is to introduce the idea of gradient descent, which underlies not only how neural networks learn, but how a lot of other machine learning works as well. Then after that, we're going to dig in a little more to how this particular network performs, and what those hidden layers of neurons end up actually looking for. As a reminder, our goal here is the classic example of handwritten digit recognition, the hello world of neural networks. These digits are rendered on a 28 by 28 pixel grid, each pixel with some grayscale value between 0 and 1. Those are what determine the activations of 784 neurons in the input layer of the network. And then the activation for each neuron in the following layers is based on a weighted sum of all the activations in the previous layer, plus some special number called a bias. Then you compose that sum with some other function, like the sigmoid squishification or array loop, the way that I walked through last video. In total, given the somewhat arbitrary choice of 2 hidden layers here with 16 neurons each, the network has about 13,000 weights and biases that we can adjust. And it's these values that determine what exactly the network, actually does. Then what we mean when we say that this network classifies a given digit is that
when y'all go out there,
those
don't
neurons in the final layer corresponds to that digit. And remember, the motivation that we had in mind here for the layered structure was that maybe the second layer could pick up on the edges, and the third layer might pick up on patterns like loops and lines, and the last one could just piece together those patterns to recognize digits. So here, we learn how the network learns. What we want is an algorithm where you can show this network a whole bunch of training data, which comes in the form of a bunch of different images of handwritten digits, along with labels for what they're supposed to be, and it'll adjust those 13,000 weights and biases so as to improve its performance on the training data. Hopefully, this layered structure will mean that what it learns generalizes to images beyond that training data. And the way we test that is that after you train the network, you show it more labeled data that it's never seen before, and you see how accurately it classifies those new images. Fortunately for us, and what makes this such a common example to start with, is that the good people behind the MNIST database have put together a collection of tens of thousands of handwritten digit images, each one labeled with the numbers that they're supposed to be. And as provocative as it is to describe a machine as learning, once you actually see how it works, it feels a lot less like some crazy sci-fi premise, and a lot more like, well, a calculus exercise. I mean, basically it comes down to finding the minimum of a certain function. Remember, conceptually, we're thinking of each neuron as being connected to all of the neurons in the previous layer, and the weights in the weighted sum defining its activation are kind of like the strengths of those connections. And the bias is some indication of whether that neuron tends to be active or inactive. And to start things off, we're just going to initialize all of those weights and biases totally randomly. Needless to say, this network is going to perform pretty horribly on a given training example, since it's just doing something random. For example, you feed in this image of a 3, and the output layer, it just looks like a mess. So what you do is you define a cost function, a way of telling the computer, no, bad computer, that output should have activations which are 0 for most neurons, but 1 for this neuron. What you gave me is utter trash. To say that a little more mathematically, what you do is add up the squares of the differences between each of those trash output activations and the value that you want them to have. And this is what we'll call the cost of a single training example. Notice, this sum is small when the network confidently classifies the image correctly, but it's large when the network seems like it doesn't really know what it's doing. So then what you do is consider the average cost over all of the tens of thousands of training examples at your disposal. This average cost is our measure for how lousy the network is and how bad the computer should feel. And that's a complicated thing. Remember how the network itself was basically a function?
Somebody
And
shot you?
takes in 784 numbers as
From
its
where?
inputs, the pixel values, and spits out 10 numbers as its output. And in a sense, it's parameterized by
Come on.
all these weights and biases. Well, the cost function is a layer of complexity on top of that. It takes as its input those 13,000 or so weights and biases, and it spits out a single number describing how bad those weights and biases are. And the way it's defined depends on the network's behavior over all the tens of thousands of pieces of training data.
Yeah. We friendly.
But just telling the computer what a crappy job it's doing isn't very helpful.
Vaughn, you know,
wanna tell
you
it
know
how
what
to
time it is.
change
Come on.
those weights and biases so that it gets better. Rather than struggling to imagine
It's two though. It's two.
just imagine a simple function that has one number as an input and one number as an output.
If I find a gun, I'm shooting him.
That minimizes the value of this function. Calculus students will know that you can sometimes figure out that minimum explicitly, but that's not always feasible for
They
really
separate.
complicated functions. Certainly
That-
not in the
Alright,
13,000
hold on.
input version of this situation for our crazy complicated neural network cost function.
I'm
More
put this shit on my
flexible
gun. Come on.
is to start
Alright.
at any old input and figure out which direction you should step to make that output lower.
We fuck around, go over here and die now. It's over with
Figure out
now.
the slope of the function where you are, then shift to the left if that slope is positive, and shift the input
I don't got no-
if that slope is negative.
What they doing? Who they
If
fighting?
you do this repeatedly, at each point checking the new slope and taking the appropriate step, you're going to approach some local minimum of the function. And the image you might have in mind here is a ball rolling down a hill. And notice, even for this really simplified single input function, there are many possible valleys that you might land in, depending on which random input you start at. And there's no guarantee that the local minimum you land in is going to be the smallest possible value of the cost function. That's going to carry over to our neural network case as well. And I also want you to notice how if you make your step sizes proportional to the slope, then when the slope is flattening out towards the minimum, your steps get smaller and smaller. And that kind of helps you from overshooting. Bumping up the complexity a bit, imagine instead a function with two inputs and one output. You might think of the input space as the xy plane, and the cost function as being graphed as a surface above it. Now instead of asking about the slope of the function, you have to ask which
Y'all finna
direction
fight them
should you
shits?
step
Hold on, that
in
shit
the
see me?
space so as to decrease the
Nah,
impact
hell
of the
nah.
function most quickly. In other words, what's the downhill direction? And again, it's helpful to think of a ball.
Trying to
rolling
wait.
down
I ain't
a hill.
finna fight that shit.
Those of you familiar with multivariable calculus will know that the gradient of a function gives you the direction of steepest ascent.
Hey,
This
hey,
way,
hey,
each
hey,
step
hold on,
can
hold on.
Increase the function most quickly. Naturally enough, taking
Hey, it's another one behind me. It's another one behind
gives
me.
you the direction to step that decreases the function most
I'm
quickly.
finna get one of these guns.
And even more than that,
Get
the
that,
length
get-
of the
yeah.
gradient vector is actually
They did, come on.
for just how steep that steepest slope is. Now, if
Oh.
you're unfamiliar with multivariable calculus and you want to learn more, check out some of the work that I did for Khan Academy on the topic. Honestly, though, all that matters for you and me right now is that in principle, there
What you got?
exists a way to compute this vector. This vector that tells you what the downhill direction is. And
Go
how steep it
ahead.
is.
Go ahead. Go
It'll be
ahead.
okay if that's all you know and you're not rock solid on the details.
Oh,
If
shit.
you can get that,
Bro, what the fuck is that over there? Man, hold on. We gotta get this shit out.
Then take a small step downhill.
There's too much going on. Hold
Over
on.
and over.
Who dead?
Idea
Hey,
for a function that has 13,000 inputs instead of 2 inputs.
hey, cuz it's a body outside the door. I don't know how you gonna loop this shit.
Biases of our network into a giant column vector. The negative gradient of the cost function is just a vector.
He got a renegade.
Inside this insanely huge.
I'm not gonna lie, though, I need
that tells
this.
you which nudges
Oh, y'all can get the
of
rest
all
of this
those
shit.
numbers is gonna
Get it,
correspond
cuz.
to
Get this shit out that nigga body.
the cost function. And of course, with our specially designed cost function, changing the weights and biases to decrease it means making the output of the network on each piece of training data look less like a random array of 10 values and more like an actual decision.
Who was
you
that
want to
shooting?
make.
That's one of y'all?
It's important to remember, this cost function involves an average over all of the training data. So if you minimize it, it means it's a better performance on all of those.
Hey, I'm gonna tell y'all though, we not gonna be able to sit right here for long. We're gonna have to go.
The algorithm for computing this gradient efficiently, which is effectively the heart of how a neural network learns, is called backpropagation. And it's what I'm going to be talking about next video. There, I really want to take the time to walk through what exactly happens to each weight and each bias for a given piece of training data, trying to give an intuitive feel for what's happening beyond the pile of relevant calculus and formulas. Right here, right now, the main thing I want you to know, independent of implementation details, is that what we mean when we talk about a network learning is that it's just minimizing a
This
cost
nigga's
function.
still talking. Hold
And
on.
notice, one consequence of that is that it's important for this cost function to have a nice, smooth output so that we can find a local minimum by taking little steps downhill. This is why